In Unit 8, we are talking about fractions, which I know is a topic that you've covered a lot in the past, but what we're going to add is variable expressions when we're working with fractions. But before we actually get into fraction operations, we're going to look at what rational numbers are and then converting fractions and decimals. So the first thing you do is write down your definition of a rational number. A rational number is one that can be written as a quotient of two integers. And so just to remind you that integers are 0, positive numbers, and negative numbers. So all of these are integers. What you'll notice is that none of these are decimals. So in order to be an integer, it cannot be a decimal. So the first thing it says to show that the number is rational by writing it as a quotient of two integers. A quotient means division, means we're going to write it as a fraction. So for number 1, to write that as a quotient of two integers, negative 14, I'm just going to write that negative 14 over 1. To write any integer as a fraction, you can just put it over 1. The next one is 0.65 or 65 hundredths. So I'm going to use the way that I say it to tell me how to write it. So since it's 65 hundredths, I'll just put 65 over 100. And for the last one, it's a mixed number, 2 and 1/3. So to write that as a quotient of two integers, I need to turn it into an improper fraction. So to do that, I'm going to do 3 times 2 plus 1, which would be 7, and then write that over 3. So again, I'm just showing that it's a rational number because I can write it as a quotient of two integers. In the next section, it says to write the fraction or mixed number as a decimal. So we're changing fractions into decimals. So for the first one, we have negative 8 over 25. One way that we can write a fraction as a decimal is to first turn it into a fraction that's out of 100. So if I wanted to make my denominator 100, I would have to multiply 25 by 4. So I could also just multiply 8 by 4, and I would get negative 32. Then if I want to turn that into a decimal, that would just be negative 0.32 or 32 hundredths. For number 2, I have 2 and 5/11ths. So to turn this into a decimal, I can't make it a fraction over 100 first because I can't do 11 doesn't go into 100. So what I'm going to have to do is division. So I'm actually going to have to do 5 divided by 11. So that'd be 11 going into 5. 11 can't go into 5, so I need to put a decimal there. Shoot that decimal up and put a 0. 11 goes into 54 times. 4 times 11 is 44. 50 minus 44 is 6. Bring down the 0. 11 goes into 65 times. 5 times 11 is 55. 55 or 60 minus 55 is 4. Bring down another 0. Sorry, that 66 minus 55 is 5. 11 goes into 54 times. So what you'll see is that we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over. So I know that this is going to be a repeating decimal. So for 2 and 5/11ths, I know I can write that as 2, and then I'll have 45 hundredths repeating. So I can write it just like that. So in that section, we did fractions and turned them into decimals. Now we're going to take decimals and turn them into fractions. So when we're given the decimal 0.38, we're going to say that in words. That's 38 hundredths. So I know to write that as a fraction, I can write it 38 over 100. And then if I wanted to, I could simplify that and divide both of those by 2, and I'd wind up with 19 over 50. For number 2, I have negative 8.4. Since I have a number to the left of the decimal, I know I'm going to wind up with a mixed number instead of just a fraction. So negative 8 is going to go out in front. And I would say 0.4 is 4/10, so I can write that as a fraction. If I simplify that, I'll wind up with negative 8 and 2/5. For the next section, we're going to order rational numbers. So all of these are rational numbers, and we're going to order the numbers from least to greatest. In order to put them in order, we need to put them all in the same form, meaning they all need to be fractions or they all need to be decimals. So for this first one, I'm going to put them all into decimals. So negative 6 over 11 as a decimal is negative 0.54 repeating. I just divided 6 divided by 11 to get that. 0.55 is already a decimal. 0.5 repeating is already a decimal. And then 27 over 50, when I do 27 divided by 50, I get negative 0.54. We want to put these in order from least to greatest. So you have to remember that when we're working with negatives, the numbers that look bigger are actually smaller. Now this one's kind of confusing because they're all very similar, but if I think about it, negative 0.5 repeating to be negative 0.55555, so that would be my smallest one, would be 0.5 repeating. Next up would be negative 0.55. After that would be negative 0.54 repeating, and then negative 0.54. So I turned them all into decimals, and then I put those decimals in order from least to greatest. The last step is to put them back in their original form. So negative 0.5 repeating stays like that. Negative 0.55 stays like that. But when I get to 0.54 repeating, I need to put it back in its original form, which was negative 6 over 11. And then for negative 0.54, its original form is negative 27 over 50. So go ahead and jot that down if you haven't already. So I'm going to let you guys go ahead and try number 2. Remember, you need to put all those into the same form first, and then you can put them in order from least to greatest. On the back side, we have an example of a word problem. It says Susan lives 2/3 miles from school, Ruben lives 5/8 miles from school, and Sam lives 7/10 miles from school. It says write each fraction as a decimal. Who lives the farthest from school? So 2/3 as a decimal is going to be 0.6 repeating. So to do that, you can just do 2 divided by 3. 5/8 as a decimal is going to be 0.625. And 7/10 as a decimal is just going to be 0.7. Then the question asks who lives the farthest from school. So since these are all positive, we just want the biggest one. So the biggest one is 0.7, which is Sam. All right, if you look, there are some review problems with simplifying expressions and finding least common multiples. Make sure you complete those and show them to your teacher before you move on.